We move on to the second speaker, Bartholomew Ryan, who comes to us from Dublin. I think, yes. He holds degrees from Trinity College, from University College Dublin, and from Aarhus. Is it Gaelic?
Aarhus, no, in Denmark.
Oh, Denmark. Oh, right. That's why I couldn't spell it. Thank you. Sorry. Sorry for the Danish members of the audience. University. He was visiting scholar at the European College of Liberal Arts in Berlin. Lady Margaret Hall from Oxford University in 2010. He's currently a postdoctoral fellow at the Institute of Philosophy of Language, right here. His current interests include juxtaposing Kierkegaard and Fernando Pessoa. He has written extensively on Kierkegaard and on critical theory, and published articles on Nietzsche, Joyce, Shakespeare, and Carl Schmitt. And the presentation is called Kierkegaard's Mellemspil, or the performance in philosophy. The performance in philosophy and society.
Okay, I won't give this talk in Danish. I'll start with two quotes as a food for thought before I go on, both by Kierkegaard, but this paper really is about Kierkegaard. So the first: there is probably no young person with any imagination who has not at some time been enthralled by the magic of the theatre, and wished to be swept along into that artificial actuality in order, like a double, to see and hear himself and to split himself up into every possible variation of himself, and nevertheless in such a way that every variation is still himself. And the second quote: are you not aware that there comes a midnight hour when everyone must unmask? Do you believe that life will always allow itself to be trifled with? Do you believe that one can sneak away just before midnight in order to avoid it? Or are you not dismayed by it? I have seen people in life who've deceived others for such a long time that eventually they are unable to show their true nature. I have seen people who have played hide and seek so long that at last, in a kind of lunacy, they forced their secret thoughts on others just as loathsomely as they proudly had concealed them from them earlier. Or can you think of anything more appalling than having it all end with the disintegration of your essence into a multiplicity, so that you actually become several, just as that unhappy demonic becomes a legion, and thus you would have lost what is most inward and holy in a human being, the binding power of the personality. Close quote. So these are the words of Constantine Constantius and Judge William, two of the many Kierkegaard synonyms. And I'll present this 19th century writer come philosopher, self-proclaimed kind of poet, theologian of sorts, and all-round mischief maker, Kierkegaard, as a philosopher, as dramatic performer par excellence. Drama was the art form he knew best, and to which he felt most akin, and it is theatre that informs his dialectical reflection in his authorship. In the history of modern philosophy, Kierkegaard juxtaposes very effectively thinking with theatre on four levels, such as: one, transforming his synonyms and signed authors as actors, which are the various synonyms, over 13 important ones, into dramatic characters, giving them quasi-Shakespearean soliloquies interspersed throughout his books, and conjuring up a labyrinthine universe of masks and marionettes in his repetitive journey to selfhood. Second, structuring and arranging his texts as dramatic works with acts, scenes, and interludes. And thirdly, the constant reference to drama, playwrights, and actresses over and instead of philosophers for examples and explanations. And fourthly, Kierkegaard's general performance and anxiety surrounding his own performance in relation to publication of his works and his own public persona within his Copenhagen contemporaries. Hence, Kierkegaard is immersed in theatre in a variety of ways, as enthusiastic theatre-goer, participator, creator, and actor of drama, the passionate Christian for a lost cause, and performer in the Copenhagen public eye. An exploration of the motif for drama in Kierkegaard's authorship not only allows for a rich and deeper reading of Kierkegaard, but also Kierkegaard's performance as an actor and creator becomes a critique of philosophy itself, and perhaps maybe an example of how drama can be transposed and utilised to reveal what philosophy sometimes cannot achieve, and thereby transform both the role of philosophy and drama. So this short presentation, I guess, is split into two parts. First, I'll try to point out the examples of where, how and why Kierkegaard becomes the dramatic performer par excellence in philosophy. And secondly, I'll introduce the term Mellemspil, which literally means interlude, between the play, like the word he uses, in Kierkegaard's tragic comic authorship, and how this can be perceived as a vital concept for understanding Kierkegaard's performative thought. So performance in philosophy. We have seen the philosopher as dramatic performer before, most obviously in ancient philosophy, most famously with Plato's dramatic dialogues, whose main actors is Socrates, and in modern philosophy, most famously with Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra, with the book's various soliloquies, characters, integrals, and the main star Zarathustra himself at the centre of the action. Derrida has also followed fast on the heels of Nietzsche to produce texts of dramatic quality for philosophy, most obviously Glass, The Postcard, and Dissemination. And Deleuze with his own interludes in his performative philosophical opus, 1,000 Plateaus. And last year, Zizek, in his most recent and largest book yet, called Less Than Nothing, structures his massive work like a theatre of some dramatic philosophical kind with various interludes. I don't think it's any coincidence that Zizek is at the same time reading Kierkegaard more intensely in the last number of years. But that aside, I've decided to bring Kierkegaard forward, who even more than these examples appropriates theatre into philosophy, and his authorship in a highly original and, which always goes with this, an excitingly problematic way. So the first level, characters, actors, marionette theatre within the text to critique philosophy. Kierkegaard divides his pseudonymous authorship into various performances and stages for the drama of existence to reveal itself and to show the various aspects of what he calls, still paradoxically, subjective truth. And we can see this as both an unmasking towards the purity of heart to will one thing, as he calls it, or the opposite, in creating a myriad of masks and a multitude of voices, as the opening two quotes, I hope, have indicated. Take the example of Kierkegaard's first major publication and what he later calls the beginning of his authorship, Either Or, as the book is called. Within this ornate dramatic text, there are at least 4 voices, if not 5. The editor, the aesthete, who could be 2, known as A or Johannes, Judge William, and the preacher. Yet despite rereadings of this famous text, mysteries still remain. There are hints that the judge and the aesthete are friends. Perhaps even the aesthete is the judge as a young man, or perhaps even the judge himself remains in the aesthetic realm. And the Either Or begins again with the final sermon by the preacher. Kierkegaard's name and signature is nowhere to be found in this text. Instead, his ghost haunts the massive work, and the pseudonymous authorship officially begins with the soliloquy and definition of the poet as a performer in the opening pages of Either Or, who in his concealment performs to the delight of the audience. And the first line of this book begins with the question and response. What is a poet? An unhappy man who conceals profound anguish in his heart, but whose lips are so formed that when sighs and cries pass over them, they sound like beautiful music. His fate resembles that of the unhappy men who were slowly roasted by a gentle fire in the tyrant Phalaris' bronze bull. Their shrieks could not reach his ears to terrify him. Instead, to him they sounded like sweet music. And the people flock about the poet and say to him, "Do sing again," which means, would that new sufferings torment your soul, and would that your lips stay formed as before, and your cries would only terrify us, but your music is delightful. And the critics join them, saying, "Well done, thus must it be according to the laws of aesthetics." Why, to be sure, a critic resembles a poet to a hair, the only difference being that he has no anguish in his heart and no music on his lips. Behold, therefore, I would rather be a swineherd on Amar and be understood by the swine than a poet and misunderstood by the people. And Amar is this crappy little outskirt of Copenhagen. It would be interesting to compare this passage with Pessoa's own Poeteum Fingidor, which Philomena quoted this morning in her talk. Here in the passage, from the most aesthetic part of his authorship, the gauntlet is let down. The philosopher is poet in the text, with the most direct response to Hegelian philosophy, and the indirect communication set forth with the deceiver to reveal and the public to misinterpret and decipher in various ways. Kierkegaard's synonyms are not simply synonyms, but are actors and characters interchanging with each other, and they re-emerge again in more than one text. And they do not reside solely in the aesthetic and ethical works, but also in his religious works, where thinking dramatically and the dramatic motif is maintained, even in the figure of Anticlimacus, this Christian pseudonymous author of The Sickness Unto Death and Practicing Christianity, two later texts by Kierkegaard, who I would like to call God's Mephistopheles to counteract the devil's Mephistopheles. Like Hermann Hesse's character Steppenwolf, Kierkegaard finds salvation from his melancholy and age of passionless reflection, as he calls it, in a magic theatre, not only through the aesthetic theatre, but also in his more serious religious writings, as Socrates, Jesus, and his last major pseudonym, Anticlimacus, are also part of the magic theatre, such as that they, as actors and performers, represent ways to overcome petrification, passivity, powerless, mediocrity, and instead invite passion, reading as an active process to provoke and incite the reader, and for the reader to hear the sounds of the text, just like what great theatre should and does do. This is approaching philosophy dramatically and transforming philosophy in an action or deed. It made me think when, is it Tom? Tom mentioned, just told me that the participator is never passive or is never fully dead. And this is exactly what Kierkegaard is trying to do. Many times he says, please read me aloud, or he says, dear reader, and he keeps going back to a particular reader who is either you or me reading, and wants that reader to be active. And halfway through, he always says, if you understand me, throw away this book. What are you doing? Get out there. Of course, and he's always talking about action, of course, but he can't himself ever get out of the vocation of writing. He says at one point, the only time he's actually happy is when he's writing, so maybe that's why he kept writing. Through the various synonyms and polyphonic universe, Kierkegaard performs this marionette theatre. It is a theatre of the self, where the inexhaustible diarists and synonyms become puppets, living synonyms as animations of the idea, aspects of the subjective truth, with Kierkegaard as puppeteer, but puppet in his God's master drama. As Kierkegaard's God communicates creatively, or we might say communicates indirectly, as we witness in Christ's parables or Socrates' maieutic techniques. Kierkegaard's religious motivations could express themselves in a fundamentally theatrical way, and Kierkegaard's dramatic landscape of pseudonymity and the set of masks is the indirect communication or parabolic communication towards subjective truth and a critique of the Western philosophy that he finds himself within. This performative aspect or dramatic philosophy enables him to portray more deeply his existential themes of anxiety, despair, passion, faith and love, and philosophical paradoxes, where the philosophical tools at his disposal are no longer effective, and instead Kierkegaard, rather than abandoning these tools altogether, is not afraid to use other means, such as images, figures and motifs from theatre, to bring the reader closer to an understanding of what is at stake in human existence. The second level regarding the performer is a reference to theatre, actors and playwrights. Alongside approaching philosophy dramatically, Kierkegaard also looks at drama philosophically, Shakespeare's words and characters and contemporary actresses and actors of his time. There is an abiding presence of Shakespeare in almost every text that Kierkegaard wrote, whether it is to express more clearly what morality is, such as quoting an opening soliloquy from Richard III in Fear and Trembling, or to playing the role of Hamlet with praying as the most difficult thing to do that a person might get right perhaps only once in their life. Or to express a secret personal pain in his own family drama by quoting King Lear's last speech to Cordelia before his death. Shakespeare also provides the motto for his posthumous autobiography, for in everything the purpose must weigh with the folly. Throughout his whole writing performance, the only living contemporaries of Kierkegaard that are treated positively are actors and actresses, and he is a very vehement critic. He really takes down people with no punches pulled. Most specifically, the two actresses, Louise Heiberg and Anna Nielsen. The actress Anna Nielsen is the only real woman mentioned in his massive work, The Stages in Life's Way, which in a nutshell, in a 500-page book about fictional men talking about fictional women who never really get to speak or respond. After a few years later, he writes an essay and publishes in a newspaper on Johanna Louisa Heiberg called The Crisis and the Crisis in the Life of an Actress, under the pseudonym Inter et Inter, literally, which means between and between, focusing on the task and triumph of a specific actress playing Shakespeare's Juliet for the second time in her mid-30s. This gives Kierkegaard the chance to celebrate the art of acting, while also giving an example of his philosophical ideas of repetition and metamorphosis. These two elated pieces on these two actresses is all the more remarkable in that Kierkegaard vehemently criticises everyone apart from these two. Perhaps at the end of the day, my hunch is that Kierkegaard always wanted to be an actress, most specifically the beautiful, talented and transformative Louisa Heidroy. The third level is the dramatic structure and arrangement of text. The performance is also felt in the very structure of the text, with the curtain raiser and closer of prefaces and conclusions with its various acts that Kierkegaard is very consciously and painstakingly arranging and rearranging. Witness at first glance what seems to be completely chaotic and fragmented organisation of the text, and yet this is all very self-consciously organised and meticulously arranged and rearranged. Obvious examples are Either Or, Fear and Trembling, and Stages on Life's Way. Prefaces are central to Kierkegaard's method and are the prelude and mood or tuning up for what is to come, which in many cases never does come. Even in his autobiography, his supposedly direct report to history, as he calls it, is in fact a collection of acts, scenes, and epilogues that leaves the reader with more questions, riddles, and allegories to decipher, which leads us to the fourth level of Kierkegaard as performer or dramatic philosopher. This final level is that it is worth mentioning how theatre takes over Kierkegaard's whole persona and enterprise in his general performance in relation to an anxiety with the publication of his texts and public perception of his persona. For Kierkegaard, it becomes vital when and how texts are published and what their covers like, with each text beginning with an inviting riddle in the form of a motto. There are always different stages in his authorship, and he is in fact thinking dramatically. As one commentator has explained, like an actor, he calculated every gesture. He was intensely concerned with matters which for most authors are quite incidental to the publication of the work, such as the appearance of the title page. He is always self-consciously on the stage, and even when he is attempting to reveal himself and showing how he always presented himself as the indolent dagdriver, which is a great word in Danish, which literally means day drifter, or flaneur, or the loafing daydreamer in his report to history, the text itself is also still full of masks, dramatic structures and riddles. Each book of publication is a stage in the drama of existence. The individuals, editors, are actors in the books, and Kierkegaard is the supreme actor and director. The second part is the Mellemspil itself. How do I do for time? I'm okay.
2 minutes.
2 minutes. Okay. The Mellemspil is where Kierkegaard's performance is situated in the territory of philosophy, which acts as the dramatic and critical interpretation and as the theatrical and active voice which provokes philosophy to respond. Kierkegaard is the philosopher's dramatic performer. The Danish word, well, I've already explained that, so I'm going to buzz forward. The word Mellemspil is explicitly mentioned in one of Kierkegaard's synonymous works. And I'll have to skip forward now, unfortunately. The Mellemspil encapsulated Kierkegaard's overall project as the play between the larger play of philosophy that disrupts the system building of philosophy, as the fragment against the whole, and as the gap that is always there to disrupt any attempt to define the philosophy of existence. When Kierkegaard does directly engage with drama in his short essay on the role of the actress, as he is between and between, inter et inter, and we are presented with the situation of the onstage and offstage role and interchange between a specific actress under scrutiny, the writer as actor, and philosopher as creator behind the scene. The theatrical concept of Mellemspil, this between the play, and he has a whole section in one book where it's a space where he tries to more or less define the history of philosophy in 10 pages, and it's all very sarcastic, but it's his way of disrupting what Hegelian philosophy has been trying to do in the space of 600 pages, and he tries to sum it up in 10 pages. So this theatrical concept of Mellemspil is not multi or transdisciplinary because it is a negative space within each discipline. It is rather interdisciplinary because it nevertheless demands attention from those disciplines by asking them to rethink themselves. It reveals a set of masks that continually displaces disciplinary identity from one field to the next. Just at the moment it seems clear. Theology masks politics, law masks theology, political theory masks philosophy, and psychology masks literary critical approaches. Its thematic deferral of overarching traditional disciplinary codes is precisely its interdisciplinarity, only and always between and among, and never a passive or facile accumulation of several topics, such as the multidisciplinary interest pursued from a work of philosophy. And figures at the interlude are always condemned to wear this kind of mask. His own work as a Mellemspil is the appropriation of theatre into philosophy, and is a prime example of interdisciplinarity as a refusal of fixed disciplinary boundaries. The whole point of borrowing from various disciplines is not to maintain the integrity of each, but rather precisely to dissolve the boundaries and to develop an entirely new framework within which to rethink the act of praxis, which is thought that transforms as dramatic action. The last paragraph. So who are the writers at the interlude? And I'll just throw out a few examples. Deleuze, in A Thousand Plateaus and in the essay on nomadic thought, has pointed to these figures of the interlude who might provoke us to act and think actively and anew. And in philosophy and religion, Socrates and Christ, at least for Kierkegaard, are figures of the interlude and also performers who provide this negative space and unleash a set of masks in their indirect or parabolic communication. And in theatre, we've experienced this in the modern era, now with figures such as Kleist, Bruckner, and Beckett, and in philosophy with Nietzsche. So in this very brief time, and I've spoken very, very fast, this paper has brought Kierkegaard to the table, as I think it is remarkable that in books juxtaposing theatre and philosophy, Kierkegaard has hardly given a mention, when the fact is that his whole authorship is an act of philosophical performance and an example of dramatic thinking through the 4 levels I've shown, and my very quick introduction to the thinker of the interlude, or Mellemspil. Thank you.